Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I ran across a very disturbing story in USA Today, and I no longer have dogs, but if you watch the end credits of every video I put up for the last couple of years, at the very end it says, "Remember Milo and Wolfie." And I had two Shetland sheep dogs for some time, and so I understand what it's like to have a dog in the household or in the family. And so when I saw this headline, it caught my attention, and as I read the story, it actually scared me. Popular flea collar linked to almost 1,700 pet deaths. Popular flea collar linked to almost 1,700 pet deaths. Next sentence, the EPA has issued no warnings. This story comes from Jonathan Hettinger from the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting. USA Today published it. So for example, Rhonda Baumwell had never used a flea and tick collar before, and Pierre, her 9-year-old Papillon service dog, was mostly an indoor animal. Still, her vet recommended that she try the flea and tick collar. So Baumwell went to the pet store near her home in Somerset, New Jersey, and selected Bayer's Seresto collar. A day later, Pierre had a seizure, collapsing while Baumwell was making dinner. Lying on his back, the dog stopped breathing, his eyes rolled back. She actually took the animal to an animal hospital where Pierre died before he could receive medical treatment. Baumwell didn't even think that it could be caused by the flea and tick collar. She said, "I just didn't put it together." Baumwell is not alone. Seresto is one of the most popular flea and tick collars in the country, has been linked to hundreds of pet deaths, tens of thousands of injured animals, and hundreds of harmed humans. This is according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Now, the EPA has not done anything about this, has not taken any steps to warn the public, and this is one of those examples where something kind of falls between the jurisdictions of different agencies. If this was medicine, the FDA would get involved. But apparently, because it's for animals, it's not on their watch. So Seresto is developed by Bayer, now sold by Elanco, works by releasing small amounts of pesticide onto the animal for months at a time. The pesticide is supposed to kill fleas, ticks, and other pests, but be safe for cats and dogs. And obviously, if it wasn't safe for them, you wouldn't put it on your dog or cat. Thousands of pets have been harmed according to federal documents obtained through a FOIA request from the Center for Biological Diversity, a nonprofit organization that watchdogs the EPA as part of its work to protect endangered species. The center provided the documents to the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting. Since Seresto flea and tick collars were introduced in 2012, the EPA has received incident reports of at least 1,698 related pet deaths, and those are the ones that have been reported. Presumably there's people out there whose animals were victim of this, and the people didn't know that it was caused by the flea and tick collars. They didn't report it. Overall, through June of 2020, the agency has received more than 75,000 incident reports related to collars, including nearly 1,000 involving people who were hurt, including nearly 1,000 involving human harm. The EPA is in charge of regulating products that contain pesticides. The agency has known about these incidents for years, but has not informed the public of the potential risks associated with the product, according to Karen McCormack, a retired EPA employee who works as both a scientist and a communications officer. McCormack said the collars had the most incidents of any pesticide pet product she's ever seen. The EPA appears to be turning a blind eye to this problem, and after 7 years of an increasing number of incidents, they are telling the public that they're continuing to monitor the situation. But I think this is a significant problem that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. The EPA declined to say how Seresto compares to other pet products, but in response to a question about whether the product is safe, an agency spokesperson said in an emailed statement that the two pesticides in Seresto have, quote, been found eligible for continued registration. They've been found eligible for continued registration, and they say it's based on the best available science. The spokesperson said no pesticide is completely without harm, but EPA ensures that there are measures on the product label that reduce risk. So there are measures on the product label that reduce risk. The product label is the law, and applicators must follow label instructions. Some pets, however, like some humans, are more sensitive than others and may experience adverse symptoms after treatment. Those adverse symptoms may include the pet dying, and that has happened, like we said, quite a few times. Amazon, which also sells Seresto, has received numerous complaints about the product from customers who detail significant issues. Dozens of people over the years have claimed the collar caused skin rashes on their pet. Others said it led to neurological issues in their pets. Despite the many warnings, the product still is in the marketplace. This isn't the first time the EPA has failed to properly regulate flea and tick collars containing pesticides, according to Miriam Rotkin-Ellman, who's a senior scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council. The NRDC filed a petition against the agency more than a decade ago over its approval of a different pesticide than the one used in Seresto that is linked to cancer and brain development issues in children. In April of 2020, a federal appeals court called the EPA's refusal to respond to the NRDC's request nothing short of egregious and told agency officials to make a decision on whether to ban the pesticide within 90 days. Of course, that was in April of 2020. The EPA decided not to ban the pesticide. That pet collar continues to be sold under the brand name of Hearts UltraGuard, Hearts In Control, and Long Life. The NRDC has challenged that decision. That lawsuit is currently pending. Even so, the number of incidents linked to that pesticide pales in comparison to those linked to Seresto. From 1992 to 2008, the EPA received 4,600 incident reports regarding pet collars containing one chemical I couldn't pronounce if my life depended on it, including 363 deaths, according to EPA documents. Broken down per year, that's 30 times fewer incidents and 10 times fewer deaths than Seresto. And those are most likely an undercount, says a senior scientist at the Center for Biological Diversity and an expert on U.S. pesticide registration. He said the number of reported incidents for Seresto is just the tip of the iceberg. In order to report an incident, a person has to make the connection between the collar and the issue with the dog, understand who to contact and how to report it. How many people here, if their dog got sick and died suddenly, would go, I bet it's the collar. I bet I should report this to the EPA. The EPA, I wouldn't have guessed. You might get upset and report it to somebody, but who would think to report that to the EPA? Most of the time, people are not going to make the connection, or they're not going to take an hour or so out of the day to figure out who to call and spend their time on hold to make the call. He said the incident data requires lots of questions about the EPA processes. My God, if this doesn't trigger a concern, that's a fundamental problem with the process, he said. The fact that the EPA has not done anything to alert the public that there might be an issue here, it strikes me as bordering on criminal. The EPA has this system in place to compile information, and it's just collecting dust in a database. So the entire story is 8 pages long. And this video would be 2 hours long if I read all 8 of them and talked about all of it with you right now. I'm not going to do that. So the point is this. There is a popular flea and tick collar on the market right now for cats and dogs. It's marketed as being safe. It's government approved. It turns out that collar has been linked to 1,600 deaths of pets. And that's being tracked by the EPA, which most people wouldn't think of as being the entity that oversees flea and tick collars. But it does simply because they contain a pesticide, which is to control the fleas and ticks. So I'm sure what's going on here is they sell millions and millions and millions of these. And they say, yeah, but there's only 1,000 complaints, 1,600 complaints, 1,700 complaints. That's a small fraction of the big number. Yeah, it is. It is. But as we all know, when you hear a statistic like, 1,000 people died or 14,000 people were injured or whatever, in the scope of the world, that's a small number. In the scope of your world, it's a big number. And so I had 2 dogs, okay? So if one of my dogs died, that would be a huge, huge deal if they died from this. I'd be very upset by that. And if your family has a dog, your dog is not a statistic, right? And so that's what often happens, I think, to bureaucrats. People who work in the government, people who work in large organizations who just track data. They get all these complaints in. The same thing happens at NHTSA. They get complaints about vehicles, okay? All these complaints are just piling in. And so what they do is, we got a bunch of complaints. Let's start compiling statistics. Let's look at the data. How many have sold? How many complaints have we got? How many fatalities are there? How many car fires are there? How many deaths are there? And they forget that one death is a big, big deal. Whether it's a family member and a human or a family member and a pet. And so it's unfortunate that the way our government's set up right now, that the flea and tick collars are overseen by the EPA, which does not appear to be equipped or run in a way that handles this appropriately. So there are other agencies out there, and I can give you some examples, but I'm sure you can think of some examples, as can I, where the Federal Trade Commission took a product off the market because people got hurt by it. So maybe the Federal Trade Commission should take over handling things that involve pets. I don't know. Maybe that would help. Maybe that wouldn't help. I don't know. Maybe one agency is no better than the other. But it is a serious, serious problem. So I would urge you to pay very close attention that if you have a dog or a cat in your family, that if you're using a flea or tick collar, flea and tick collar, that you need to look to see what brand you're using and pay very close attention, especially when it first goes on. And one of the things I've always been worried about, and I remember dealing with issues like this with my dogs, the thing is that they'll often say it's based on weight. They'll go, well, if your dog weighs 20 pounds, they wear this. If it's 21 to 30 pounds, they wear this. And they're basing it on weight, and I understand that. But I often wonder about, like, let's suppose that there's a range of weight, and they say this collar is appropriate for this weight of dog. If your dog is right here, should your dog be wearing the collar that's appropriate for the one at the other end of that range scale? That has always worried me. And I wonder if that might be part of the problem. There might be other problems, and it might just simply be that some animals have got adverse reactions to stuff. Humans do. I know people who have allergic reactions to things that don't affect me, and vice versa. So I suspect that it's probably even more so in dogs. There's such a broad range of breeds of dogs. So the popular flea collar has been linked to almost 1,700 pet deaths. The EPA has not issued a warning yet, but I'm issuing a warning, and I think other people will too. The USA Today ran this article. It's great. I'll put a link to the article in the description below so you can read the whole thing. There's a lot more to this, but what I got to you was the framework of it. And so that's the brand of the collar. So what we're talking about is the Seresto flea and tick collar for cats and dogs. So that's the one we're talking about. Be very, very wary of that. Read the article below if you're interested in more. And I think you should be careful with this. Jonathan Hettinger wrote it. USA Today published it. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. When your work speaks for itself, don't interrupt.